In 1998, a man named Konstantin came home early from a business trip to Kiev. He was not supposed to be home until Thursday. He came home Tuesday. He walked through the front door of his house in Brighton Beach at 11 in the morning and found something he was not supposed to find. What happened in the next 4 minutes is documented, partially, carefully, with significant portions redacted, in a New York Police Department incident report filed that same day. What happened in the 4 months after those 4 minutes is not in any police report. It is in the memory of a woman named Irina, who was Konstantin's wife, who is now 61 years old, who lives in a city she has never named publicly, and who gave one account of what her life became after that Tuesday morning to a journalist who spent 3 years earning enough trust to hear it. She began the account with one sentence. She said, "The man he found in our house was gone before the police arrived. I was still there." That tells you everything about how the next 4 months went. This is what happened to Russian mob bosses' wives who cheated. And it is not the story you think it is. Not because it is gentler than you think. Because it is more controlled than you think. More deliberate. More specifically engineered to produce a particular outcome for the woman involved while leaving the man's reputation, his organizational standing, and his operational life completely intact. The violence, when it comes, is almost never the point. The point is the control. And the control never ends. Before you can understand what happened to Irina, you need to understand what she was. Not who she was. What she was. In the Russian organized crime world, the boss's wife occupies a specific structural position that has no equivalent in any legitimate social organization. She is not simply a spouse. She is an asset. Not in the dehumanizing sense of the word. She is treated with genuine respect, genuine care, genuine affection in many cases. But an asset in the organizational sense. She is the repository of information that cannot be put anywhere else. She knows the names that her husband cannot write down. She knows the relationships that cannot be documented. She knows, from years of kitchen conversations and overheard phone calls, and the specific osmosis of living inside a world that never fully turns off, the operational details of an organization that keeps no official records. She is also, in the specific context of immigrant criminal communities in cities like New York and Philadelphia, and Los Angeles, the social infrastructure. She manages the relationships with other bosses' wives. She knows which alliances are solid and which are performative. She knows who is sick, who is struggling, who is having marital problems of their own. And marital problems in this world are security problems, because unhappy people talk to people they should not talk to. She is, in short, irreplaceable. Which is why, when she betrays the organization, not just the marriage, the organization, the response is not what most people expect. It is not a bullet. It is a cage. A very comfortable, very permanent, very invisible cage. Irina had been married to Konstantin for 14 years when the Tuesday morning happened. She had met him in Odessa in 1982. She had come to New York with him in 1991, in the wave of Soviet emigration that followed the collapse, carrying 2 suitcases and a 9-year-old daughter, and the specific combination of hope and terror that every immigrant carries across that particular threshold. Konstantin had built something in Brighton Beach. Not quickly, not without cost, but by the mid-1990s, he was a significant figure in the Russian organized crime ecosystem of South Brooklyn, extortion, loan sharking, the the specific financial infrastructure that immigrant communities generate when the legitimate economy has not yet made room for them. Irina had built something too. The household, the relationships, the social world that her husband's organizational position required, and that she maintained with an intelligence and a social precision that people who met her noticed immediately. She was also, by 1997, profoundly lonely. Konstantin was not absent. He was present in the physical sense. He slept in the house. He ate meals there. He was around. But present in the way that men who are completely absorbed in one thing are present in everything else. Technically, functionally, not really. The man she had met in Odessa, the man she had followed across the world, had become, over 14 years, a version of himself that left less and less room for anyone who was not the organization. She met someone at a community event in the fall of 1997. She was careful. She was not careful enough. Konstantin did not lose control when he came home on Tuesday. This is the first thing that Irina described in her account to the journalist as the thing that scared her most. He was calm. He looked at what he found. He said nothing to the man in the house. Nothing, not a word, just looked at him with an expression that the man apparently found sufficiently communicative, because the man left within 90 seconds without being asked to leave. Then Konstantin looked at Irina. He said, "Call your daughter and tell her not to come home tonight." He said it the way you say something about the weather. Irina called her daughter. The 4 minutes documented in the police report involved a neighbor who heard raised voices and called 911. 2 officers arrived. Nothing was broken. Nobody was hurt. Konstantin told the officers there had been a domestic disagreement. The officers left. Konstantin sat down at the kitchen table. He said, "We are going to have a conversation." The conversation lasted 3 hours. He did not threaten her. He did not raise his voice after the first 4 minutes. He explained with the specific, organized clarity of a man who runs a criminal enterprise and who approaches problems with the same analytical precision he applies to everything, what was going to happen next. He said, "You are not going to leave. You are not going to speak to anyone about this outside this house. You are going to continue to do everything you have been doing. The difference is that I am going to know where you are at all times and who you are speaking to." He said, "These are not negotiations." He said, "The man is going to leave New York. I have already arranged this. He will not contact you. If he does, I will know." He said, "Your daughter will not be told what happened. She will have a normal life. Whether that continues to be possible depends on the decisions you make starting now." He said, "Do you understand?" She said yes. She understood. She had always understood this world she was living in. She had simply not, until that Tuesday, fully understood what it meant to be inside it. The man left New York within 48 hours. Irina found out later, much later, from a source she would not name, that he had been visited. Not hurt. Visited. By 2 men who were very clear about the situation and about what continuing to exist in New York would cost him. He moved to Chicago. He did not contact Irina. She never heard from him again. She was not surprised. She understood by then the specific economy of the world she lived in. The man she had been involved with was a civilian, not connected, not organizational. In her husband's world, civilians who created problems for organizational figures had 2 options: remove themselves or be removed. He had chosen to remove himself. She had not been given that option. The cage was invisible from the outside. This is the second thing that Irina described to the journalist, and the thing that the journalist said she returned to most consistently across the 3 years of their conversations. From the outside, nothing changed. She continued to attend the social events she had always attended. She continued to manage the relationships with other bosses' wives. She continued to host dinners and manage the household, and perform every function that the organization had come to depend on her to perform. She continued to be Ainsan, the term used in Russian organized crime for the boss's wife, borrowed from the Yakuza, meaning older sister, meaning the woman of unquestioned authority. Nothing visible changed. What changed was invisible. Her phone was monitored. Not secretly, Konstantin told her. He was specific about it. He said, "I will know who you call and who calls you." He said, "I'm not doing this to punish you. I am doing this because what you know makes you a security concern, and security concerns require monitoring." He framed it as operational necessity rather than punishment. It was both. Her movements were tracked, not by a security detail that would have been visible, by the specific social network that the organization maintained. The woman who ran the hair salon that Irina had been going to for 6 years was connected. The woman who managed the school her daughter attended was a wife of an organizational associate. The dry cleaner, the grocery store, the community events. She was always in a network of people who knew who she was and who would, if she did something that required reporting, report it. She knew this. She had always been inside this network. She had thought of it as her community. After Tuesday, she understood that the community was also the cage. The Russian organized crime world has a specific approach to wives who transgress that is different from both the Italian-American model and the popular cultural image of what organized crime does to victims. The Italian-American mafia historically dealt with transgressing wives through a combination of social shunning. The wife was cut off from the community, isolated, stripped of her social position, and in extreme cases, violence. The Russian model is almost the opposite. The wife is not stripped of her social position. She is kept in it. She is kept visible, kept functional, kept performing all the roles that made her valuable in the first place. Because stripping her of her position would create 2 problems. First, it would reveal the transgression. In the specific social environment of Brighton Beach in the late 1990s, a tight, interconnected, gossip-saturated immigrant community, the sudden social demotion of a boss's wife would be noticed and interpreted correctly. This damages the boss's reputation. It signals vulnerability. In an environment where reputation is operational currency, visible domestic weakness is a liability that sophisticated men cannot afford. Second, it would eliminate the leverage. The wife who is stripped of her position and cast out has nothing left to lose. The wife who is kept inside the position but monitored, who continues to have her daughter's normal life to protect, her social standing to maintain, her access to the community, has everything to lose at every moment. She is more controlled by what she has than she would be by what she had lost. This is not accidental. This is architecture. Her daughter was 19 when the Tuesday morning happened. Her name was Vera. She was in her first year of college. She came home on weekends. She had grown up in Brighton Beach with the specific, layered knowledge of a child raised inside a world she understood obliquely, knowing that her father's work was not what he said it was, not asking the questions that would produce answers she could not unknow. She did not know about Tuesday. Not immediately. Not for several years. What she knew was that her mother, who had always been warm and present and fully available, became something slightly different after the fall of 1998. Not cold. Not absent. Something more specifically controlled. Like a woman who was choosing every word more carefully than before. Who was present at every family event, but present in a way that felt managed rather than natural. Vera asked her mother once, years later, when she was old enough to ask the question directly. She said, "What happened to you? You changed, and you never said why." Irina looked at her daughter. She said, "I made a mistake." Vera said, "What kind of mistake?" Irina said, "The kind that you understand the consequences of for the rest of your life." Vera did not ask again. She understood enough to understand that understanding more was not available to her. Not all of these stories involve the cage. Some of them are more direct. In 2004, a woman named Svetlana, the wife of a senior figure in a Russian organized crime network in Los Angeles, was having an affair with a man who was connected. Not organizational, but adjacent, a businessman who moved in the same social circles, who attended the same events, who was known to everyone and whose involvement with Svetlana was therefore not a private matter, but a semi-public one that people had been aware of for 6 months before her husband was told. The fact that people had been aware of it for 6 months before her husband was told was itself a signal. It meant someone had made a decision to tell him. Someone had decided that the time was right. In the Russian organized crime world, information is currency. The decision to spend a piece of currency, to tell a boss what his wife has been doing, is a calculation that involves more than the information itself. It involves the relationship between the person telling and the person being told. It involves the timing. It involves what the person telling wants to get from the telling. Svetlana's husband found out from a man who wanted something from him. The information was a gift, a demonstration of loyalty and concern. The gift created obligation. This is the part of these stories that nobody discusses. The wife's transgression is the event, but the social and organizational machinery that processes that event, who tells whom, when, for what purpose, with what calculation, is the actual story. Svetlana's husband was told on a Tuesday evening by a man who had dinner with him at a restaurant in Brentwood. By Thursday morning, the man she had been involved with had left Los Angeles. By the following Tuesday, Svetlana had been moved to an apartment in a part of Los Angeles that was far from their previous life, in a neighborhood where she knew no one, with a specific and explicit set of conditions about her movements and communications that her husband communicated to her through a lawyer. Not their shared lawyer. His lawyer. She was 44 years old. She had no income of her own. No bank account. No professional history. She had an apartment and a monthly allowance and a set of conditions. And a daughter in high school who came to visit on weekends and who was told that her parents were separating and who was not told why. The women who navigated this best, who found ways to survive inside the cage or who, in rare cases, found ways out of it, had two things in common. The first was information, not the information that put them in the situation. The relationships they understood. The specific, detailed, irreplaceable intelligence that their position had given them access to over years of being the person that other people talked to. Leverage. Not leverage that could be spent openly. Spending it openly meant confirming to the organization that she was a security risk and that the cage needed to be replaced by something more permanent. But leverage that existed in the background of every interaction, that both parties understood was there, that shaped the terms of the arrangement without ever being explicitly discussed. The women who had accumulated enough of this leverage, who had been in the position long enough and had paid enough attention, were in a different negotiating position than the women who had not. The cage was still there. The monitoring was still there. The conditions were still there. But the conditions were different. The second thing they had in common was a specific kind of patience. Not acceptance. Not resignation. Patience. The understanding that the cage was built for the short term, for the period during which the transgression was fresh, during which the organizational optics required visible control, and that the long term was a different calculation. Irina is 61 years old now. Konstantin died in 2011. Heart attack. He was 63. What happened to Irina after his death is the part of the story that the journalist she spoke to found most striking. The cage, which had been the structure of her life for 13 years, did not open when Konstantin died. Not immediately. Because the cage had never been just about Konstantin. It had been about the organization. The organization's interest in keeping her inside the social structure, inside the monitoring network, inside the arrangement. That interest did not disappear when her husband's heart stopped. Men came to the house the day after the funeral. Polite men. Respectful men. Men who expressed their deep condolences and their respect for her and their ongoing commitment to the relationship between herself and the organization. They used a word that she had heard before. They said arrangements. They said they hoped the current arrangements could continue, that her position in the community could continue, that the relationship between herself and the organization could be maintained in a way that was mutually beneficial. She understood what they meant. The information she held did not expire when Konstantin died. The leverage existed regardless of whether the man who had built the cage was still alive. She thought about this for several weeks. Then she made a phone call. Not to the organization. Not to a lawyer connected to the organization. To a federal prosecutor in the Southern District of New York, whose name she had been given years earlier by a source she would not identify, as a number to call if she ever wanted to have a conversation. She had held the number for 7 years. She had never been ready to use it. After the men came to the house the day after the funeral and talked about arrangements, she was ready. The conversation with the federal prosecutor lasted 4 hours. She did not cooperate formally, did not become a witness, did not testify against anyone. What she provided was intelligence, the specific, detailed, years-accumulated intelligence of a woman who had spent 26 years at the center of a major Russian organized crime operation, and who had paid the kind of attention that only people with nothing else to focus on can pay. Names, dates, relationships, financial arrangements, the specific geography of how money moved through the community, who owned what through whom, which legitimate businesses were fronts and which fronts were legitimate. She knew things that the FBI's Organized Crime Division had been trying to find out for a decade. She told them, "Not all of it. Enough of it. Enough to produce." Over the 18 months that followed that initial 4-hour conversation, a set of investigations that she will not discuss and outcomes that she monitors from a distance and that she describes, when she describes them at all, as satisfactory. She did not go into WITSEC. She did not change her name. She moved to a different city. Under her own judgment about which city was far enough from Brighton Beach that the organization's social network did not reach her effectively and close enough to her daughter, who lives in a different state, who has built her own life, who was told the full story when she was 29 years old, and who sat with it for 6 months before she called her mother back to be accessible. She is in that city now. She drinks tea in the morning and talks to her daughter twice a week, and does not discuss what she knows with anyone except the federal prosecutor, who calls occasionally with questions she answers carefully and specifically. She is not free exactly. She is the freest she has been since before the Tuesday morning in 1998. That is enough. Here is what happened to Russian mob bosses' wives who cheated. The man she was involved with left.